Why did Valkorion, the most powerful Sith Lord in history, fear his own daughter, Vaylin? Greetings, acolytes, and welcome to the Archives. The story of the Eternal family is one full of strife, tragedy, and preventable disaster. Valkorion, secretly the most evil Sith Lord to exist, had established a wife and 3 children. But things quickly went downhill, as all of his children soon began to loathe their loving mother, and do everything they could to appease their cruel father. We plan on making a video all about Arcann and Thexan, the twin princes who conquered the Jedi and Sith at the same time on the battlefield, going over their campaign and their exploits. So if you would like to see that video, please leave a like and request it below. But for today, we wanted to talk about the final born of the Eternal Royals, the daughter known as Vaylin. In our research, we have found that her strength in the Force was enough to put Valkorion on extremely high alert, and it's possible that Vaylin may be one of the most dangerous Force sensitives of her entire era, maybe even the only one that was a true rival to Valkorion, putting her as a rival to what many consider, myself included, to be the most powerful Sith Lord that has ever existed in Star Wars lore. So join us as we open an eternal holocron and dive into why the Emperor feared his own daughter more than any other enemy. The girl named Vaylin was born several years after her older twin brothers, and immediately stood out as being much different than they were. Immediately they knew that she was special. They could sense that Vaylin was the most powerful member of her family besides their father. Before Vaylin was even born, she made the furniture move around their home while she was still within her mother's womb. As a toddler, Vaylin tore apart droids and even crippled a guard who dropped a ball that she had tossed. She had a raw and a wild potency in the Force, inherited straight from her father in a way that her brothers did not inherit. Her mother Senya could see her talent and tried to help her control it by encouraging her to do more things with her hands rather than relying solely on the Force. Her intent was to encourage Vaylin to place less value in her own power and more in her other capabilities, a lesson that Senya had failed to properly impart on her twin sons, who idolized their father as a god. However, Vaylin deeply desired to be like her brothers and wanted to train as they did, as warriors for the Eternal Throne. As Vaylin grew older, Senya oversaw her training with the Knights of Zakul, while Valkorion watched from the shadows. It was during this time that a deadly trait of Vaylin's would make itself known: her quickness to rage and an uncontrollable destruction within the Force. During one fateful training session, Vaylin repeatedly failed to pull off the moves required while training with the Knights, and in a moment of frustration, she lifted up 5 Knights of Zakul at the same time, crushing them within their own armor until her mother stopped her. Valkorion watched this entire thing unfold and was extremely pleased. But here's something peculiar also happened with Valkorion. He was greatly concerned. Vaylin showed far more promise than her brothers had, and yet was far more of a danger. And Valkorion was reminded of a power that he had not felt the potency of in some time. That power was his own. The power of a young Sith pureblood on the world of Nathema, Tenebrae, the man he used to be. And Vaylin had inherited that old power. We must turn back the clock 1,000 years when we first met Tenebrae, the original incarnation of the man who became Vitiate and then Valkorion. Tenebrae was born out of wedlock by a Sith Lord during the days of the Old Empire. This was in the ancient times when Martynas was the reigning Lord of the Sith, and had instated an era known as the Golden Age. Tenebrae was a Sith pureblood who was born with pitch black eyes and evil within his heart. He was naturally powerful with the dark side on a level never seen before, and by the time Tenebrae was 9 years old, he had killed his stepfather, mentally tortured, and murdered his mother, and had stripped his biological father of all his powers before murdering him also. The boy, though, was not done, and would go on to enslave the entire planet of Nathema. And just to reiterate, Tenebrae was a child. He was such a prodigy that Martynas himself decided to take a trip to Nathema to meet the boy king. Ragnos endorsed his rulership of the planet, and even supplemented him with powerful knowledge, and dubbed him Vitiate, giving him holocrons, studies of alchemy, amulets, and more as a gift. But most importantly, he was given that name, Vitiate, directly handed down to him by the reigning Dark Lord. Now we move back to the present time, as Valkorion has witnessed his daughter's raw, unleashed power kill 5 knights, 5 elite fighters and warriors of Zakul, some of the most skilled fighters in the entire galaxy. By this era, the Knights of Zakuul's powers were derived directly from Valkorion, but Vaylin was everything that he wished his sons had been. Unfortunately though, she was also so much more. Valkorion at her age had taken over his entire world, and if Vaylin was showing the promise that he had, then he rightly feared what she one day would become, and feared that he was currently raising his usurper. Valkorion could save himself a lot of trouble by having her murdered. However, deep within himself, Valkorion was still Sith, even if he didn't follow their way, and he could not resist the allure of using a potential weapon. That weapon just so happened to be his own flesh and blood. So he took his daughter away to the planet of Nathema, to a place known as the Sanitarium. This last inhabited structure on the entire world of Nathema. This housed a scientist by the name of Jarek, as well as an old cult known as the Nathema Zealots. Valkorion wanted to put Vaylin under his control, and had instructed the scientists to break her mind by any means necessary, even if it meant risking their own lives. The last thing that Vaylin saw of her old self was her mother, watching her being taken into the sanitarium. Before we get into what actually happened with Vaylin and what she suffered though during these many rituals, let's talk about raw power. Namely, why is it that Vaylin is so much stronger than Arcann and Thexan despite them all being spawns of Valkorion? Well, we have a theory, one which is substantiated by lore evidence, but to explain it, we also have to explain why Vitiate's host bodies and essence transfer function, which gets a little mind-bending. Tenebrae, once he was dubbed Vitiate, ended up performing the ritual of Nathema, an infamous ritual that involved draining the planet of all life in the Force and making it a hellscape of annihilation, an eternal black storm. He was given near godlike power and a prolonged life, and Vitiate would remain in his Sith pureblood body for a couple thousand years until Revan would return to challenge him in the year 3954 BBY. Vitiate, though, was known as being overly cautious and decided to raise up several Force-sensitive bodies in which he would impart his will and act through them while his original Sith pure-blooded body remained permanently within a stasis pod, heavily guarded. These Force-sensitive bodies that he raised up were actual people, but Vitiate essentially hollowed them out, taking pieces of his own essence and mind and putting them within these host bodies. These bodies were henceforth known as the Voices of the Emperor, and wielded a power, although just a fraction of what Tenebrae had. Now, while several of these voices could exist at one time, only one could house his actual spirit. Vitiate learned to switch his consciousness between voices, but while his spirit resided within his living body, he was unable to move it until that body died. Vitiate had several voices because his power was so great that the host bodies would quickly deteriorate, requiring him to switch his spirit to a new voice. He had at least 3 host bodies as Vitiate. Now one of these voices was different, which was of course the body of Valkorion. Originally, the man Valkorion was an extremely powerful warrior on the planet of Zakuul, and was considered the greatest warrior of that race. Vitiate would take note of this, and would hollow him out, and make him a voice, taking special care to prevent that Valkorion's body did not deteriorate, allowing him to establish the Eternal Empire, and a new family, while acting as ruler of this new empire, as well as the Empire of the Sith. But during the first part of what was known as the Great Galactic War, Vitiate's spirit resided in the voice which was controlling the Sith Empire, not in the body of Valkorion, which is very important. This is crucial because Valkorion had Arcann and Thexan before Vitiate's full spirit inhabited that body. It was actually the birth of his sons, which prompted Vitiate to call the Treaty of Coruscant in the year 3655 BBY, bringing a ceasefire to the war. Vitiate wanted to do this because his focus was on the birth of his twin sons, elsewhere in the galaxy that the Sith and the Republic were unaware of, and he gave almost full control of the Sith Empire over to the Dark Council, while Vitiate retreated away to focus on Valkorion and the new Eternal Family. To consolidate where he found true new power, the Sith power had grown stale and old, and Vitiate desired to build something with his own 2 hands. It would be after this that Darth Vitiate's voice body would be destroyed, and his spirit fully joined with Valkorion. Valkorion was no longer just a voice, Valkorion was Vitiate. Years earlier, Senya recalled Valkorion as a loving father, until right after the twins were born. Following this, Valkorion was noted to become cold and distant, This was because his spirit was now fully inhabiting Valkorion's body. There was nothing left of this great warrior. But all of this eventually leads back to the explanation of Vaylin. Vaylin is the youngest of the children. This means that Valkorion had his full spirit within that body, making Vaylin the full-spirited heir to the gargantuan power of Tenebrae, his only true offspring. This is why Vaylin is so much like her father. Valkorion knew all of this, which is what made him so terrified of her. She wielded his purest power. On Nathema, Vaylin would be brutally tortured physically, mentally, and emotionally by the scientists and the zealots. Again, the only limits placed on the scientists were that they were not allowed to use any methods that would kill Vaylin. Anything and everything, though, besides death was on the table in order to secure her conditioning. Vaylin underwent vile experiments at the hand of the zealots, who covered her arms in ritualistic tattoos and shaved her head. The scientists subjected her to multiple horrors, as she was tested both physically and mentally in constant fear, pain, and isolation, chemically enhancing her to feel these emotions constantly. She was made to observe test subjects being torn apart by creatures, witness the dissection of corpses, and experience the effects of chemicals and implants. Vaylin chose to blame her suffering directly on her mother, who she believed had abandoned her. Senya, though, would actually try to rescue Vaylin from the sanitarium, but Vaylin had refused to go with her. The only comfort she had was her brother Thexan, who would occasionally visit her and bring her gifts from worlds that he was conquering. Eventually, the scientists on Nathema would use machines of his own design to complete the conditioning of Vaylin. This was the straw, and her mind finally broke. The entire time, Vaylin remained completely unaware of the true purpose of her stay on Nathema. Vaylin was being conditioned to become powerless against whoever spoke the code phrase, "Kneel before the dragon of Zakul." Valkorion got what he wanted. He got a weapon, and one that he used at his disposal. One that he needed to design would never turn against him. He created a slave. Vaylin was cruel, vindictive, and prone to temper tantrums, with the conditioning making Vaylin's mental state extremely unstable, transforming her into a monster of Valkorion's design. In the very end, though, Valkorion would get repaid everything that he did to Vaylin and his family. But that is a holocron for another day. This was the truth of Valkorion's great fear for his daughter Vaylin. He feared her more than any other person in the galaxy, Jedi or Sith. He feared above all else that which he knew most intimately, his own power in the Force. A fascinating prospect, Vaylin being the only true heir to the Eternal Empire and the Sith throne. The only true daughter of Valkorion, Vitiate, Tenebrae. But anyway, my friends, what are your thoughts on this ancient, dark side tainted, eternal holocron? What are your thoughts on the massive power of Vaylin? And where do you think the character of Vaylin stacks up to someone like the Chosen One, Anakin Skywalker? How powerful do you think Vaylin could have become? And what are your thoughts on Valkorion fearing her? As always, my friends, thank you so much for visiting the channel and the archives today. If you've been enjoying, it would mean the world if you could reach out and subscribe. And as always, may the Force be with you.